Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Jonathan Jacobs, a 3GNY board member and a grandchild of 2 Holocaust survivors. For those of you who are new to our community, 3GNY is an educational nonprofit for grandchildren, survivors, and our supporters. As a living link, we preserve the legacies and lessons of the Holocaust. Our mission is to educate diverse communities about the perils of intolerance. We have all seen the heartbreaking studies showing the lack of Holocaust knowledge among recent high school and college graduates. The good news is that students who do receive Holocaust education are more tolerant and comfortable with people of different races and backgrounds. They're more willing to challenge incorrect or biased information and are more likely to be upstanders. Needless to say, education is the answer. And this is why we educate. We Do program is so critical today. We Do is our specialized training program which teaches grandchildren of survivors to learn and compellingly share their family testimony in school classrooms. 3GNY has trained over 350 speakers in the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and around the country, and have spoken in more than 500 classrooms. This has impacted more than 31,000 students. But we need to do more. During the COVID pandemic, we transitioned many of our events and school visits to virtual settings. We also created new events such as our We Do Wednesdays, in which our 3G trainees share their family stories in a bi-weekly Zoom setting. Through our grandparents' testimony, we talk about the importance of stepping in early and often, where small injustices are found. To that end, you can help us accomplish this through a financial gift of any amount. Your contributions will go directly towards training more speakers and thus reaching even more students. We don't solicit donations from schools, teachers, or students. We provide our education and programming to schools completely free, and we aim to keep the cost of training to 3Gs as low as possible. There's a link with ways to donate that's going to be in the chat, and we hope that you will consider making a gift. Thank you for helping us honor the memories of our grandparents, ensuring that we never forget is more than just an empty phrase. But let's now focus on why we're all here. I'm so pleased to have Fanny Wedro with us tonight. To introduce her and share more, I'd like to now call on 3G board member Shannon Sachs.
Thank you, Jonathan, and good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight for this very special program. As some of you may know, my name is Shannon Sachs, and I'm on the executive board of 3GNY. I'm also the grandchild of 2 Holocaust survivors, Mania Sachs from Sosnowiec, Poland, and Samuel Sachs from Będzin, Poland. Tonight, I'm very honored and humbled to be able to present our program, as not only is the content of great importance, but our speaker is quite special to me. Before we start tonight's program, I just want to take a moment to remember all those who lost their lives in the massacre of Babi Yar exactly 80 years ago last week. Over a 36-hour period between September 29th and 30th in 1941, nearly 34,000 Jews were marched in small groups at the outskirts of Kiev, stripped naked and machine gunned to their deaths in the Babi Yar ravine. Over the next 2 years, the mass graves swelled with thousands of other victims, primarily Jews, but also including communist officials and Soviet prisoners of war. The massacre of Babi Yar was the first major massacre in what was coined the Holocaust by bullets, which is a large part of tonight's discussion and program. Now, a little bit of background is how I know our special guest tonight. Back in early 2007, I moved from New York City to Hawaii for a job opportunity. I didn't know anyone on island, but I knew Passover was rapidly approaching. So on the first night of Passover, I decided to attend Chabad Hawaii's Passover Seder. I was seated next to a woman who reminded me very much of my grandma, Manya. Her name is Fania, but she told me to call her Fanny. Fanny and I started the evening with casual small talk, and by the time 4 questions were being asked, Fanny and I were already hundreds of questions deep into each other's lives, where we're from, where we grew up, you know, and how we ended up on Oahu for Seder, 2 nice Jewish girls on Oahu. I learned that Fanny was a Holocaust survivor from a town in Poland, which is now part of the Ukraine, actually, and that she lived in Calgary, but wintered on Oahu. I told Fanny about my grandparents, Manya and Samuel of blessed memory, who were also Holocaust survivors from Poland. By the time the Seder was finished and the afikomen had been eaten, I felt like I had known Fanny my whole life. She was warm, funny, whip smart, and we got on quite well. Our first meeting turned into brunches and then walks in Waikiki Beach, and a forever friendship was born, and it was very meaningful to me. Fast forward to the present, Fanny and I still keep in touch, and although neither of us has been back to Hawaii recently, we still FaceTime and keep each other updated on what's going on in our lives. Now, while the pandemic brought us different experiences, it brought me a new job, a house in suburbia, and a husband. Fanny's pandemic experience gave her the opportunity to be selected by the US Shoah Foundation to be their next hologram in their Dimensions and Testimony project. I was ecstatic when Fanny told me, and I immediately asked her to be a 3G speaker for us, and here she is tonight. She's going to share with us her Holocaust story and a little bit about her hologram experience, which she recently filmed. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, what on earth is going on when I discuss holograms and Holocaust survivors, here goes. As many of you know, the USC Shoah Foundation was established by Steven Spielberg in 1994 to document firsthand accounts of the Holocaust for future generations. Their mission was to develop empathy, understanding, and respect through testimony. The foundation has archived video testimonies of over 55,000 Holocaust and genocide survivors, while also exploring innovative ways to bring their stories to life. Dimensions and Testimony was created to enable people to ask questions that prompt real-time responses from pre-recorded video from interviews with survivors and other witnesses to genocide. This interactive educational tool allows students, museum goers, and will allow future generations to have virtual conversations with Holocaust survivors about their experiences as they were eyewitnesses to the Holocaust. So back in August of this year, Fanny went to Toronto and underwent hours and hours of questioning to provide her contribution to Dimensions and Testimony. From what I understand, her hologram will be completed maybe in the next 8 months or so, and her story will forever be preserved for future generations to learn. Fanny's story of survival and remarks on kindness, empathy, tolerance, and acceptance will forever provide lessons for the benefit of future generations. Tonight, we're going to hear Fanny's compelling story of survival and bravery, but we'll also learn a largely untold part of the Holocaust, often referred to as the Hidden Holocaust or Holocaust by bullets. We'll also learn about Fanny's firsthand experience in creating her hologram and the lengthy process involved in its creation. Now, a little bit about the Hidden Holocaust. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this part of Holocaust history, it began in 1941 when the Nazis began entering towns with roving mobile squads, and they would just shoot down people. They performed mass shootings of entire towns. They killed over 2 million Eastern European Jews, about a third of those killed in the Holocaust. The shootings were public, they were local, and witnessed by neighbors. Jewish populations of entire villages and towns were slaughtered in mere hours. The arbitrary yet calculated shootings led to mass unmarked graves all across Eastern Europe. The remains of Nazi Germany's victims lie in hundreds of mass graves, particularly throughout Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Belarus, Russia, the Ukraine, Moldova, and Romania. There are few survivors to tell the world what happened. To bring us back to tonight's presentation, our guest speaker tonight is Miss Fania Wedro, Fanny, and Fanny is one of the few survivors of Holocaust by bullets. My beloved Fanny was born in Korec, Poland, which is now situated in the Ukraine, in 1927. As a side, Fanny just turned 94 last month, so happy birthday, Fanny. She doesn't look a day over 21, if you ask me, and you'll see. At the age of 14, the Nazis took away her father and the other men living in the village. Fanny then spent 6 months working in a ghetto in Korec, where she escaped 2 mass killings by the Nazis and was a firsthand witness to the barbaric evil of the Nazi invasion of her hometown and the brutal treatment and massacre of her community. After escaping the second mass killing, she lived in hiding in a forest for 18 months. After liberation in 1944, Fanny was smuggled across various borders and eventually reached a displaced persons camp in Linz, Austria. She became a teacher in the camp and met her husband, Leo. And in 1948, the couple immigrated to Canada and became successful business owners. Fanny continues to share her story and experiences during the Holocaust and continues efforts to bring attention to the massacre of Jewish villagers in Eastern Europe. She participates in the Holocaust Education Symposium held annually with high school students, telling the story of her survival during the Holocaust. As a part of her mission to raise awareness on the Holocaust, Fanny works tirelessly to make sure the story of her family and the massacre of Jewish villagers in Eastern Europe will never be forgotten. Fanny continues to support many organizations and advocates strongly on Jewish issues and causes. The recipient of numerous awards, one that brings Fanny the most pride, is the one she received from Israel Bonds in 2019, the Golda Meir Leadership Award. And without further ado, here's Fanny. Now, Fanny, I just want you to start. Ooh, I hear an echo, sorry. I just want to briefly start, well, I want to welcome you, but I also want to basically start with your childhood. Tell me about what life was like growing up in Koretz.
What was it like for you growing up in Koretz?
Oh, what's the question? I didn't catch the question.
Yeah, start talking.
Okay, look, what it was after growing up. I grew up in a very, 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 very beautiful town, and a very Jewish town, and a very Zionistic town. That's what our town. Like, we weren't religious, but we were very, very Zionistic, and everything was as to say, traditional. I was going to a private school and a Hebrew school where we most of the studies was in Hebrew, most of the subjects, and in Polish. So we right away went into two languages. My father was a herborist. We spent our summer times with my grandparents, which is 15 kilometers from our town. But those days, 15 kilometers was a long way, I'm telling you. It was somewhere far away. It took a day to get ready, and by horse and buggy, it took about 3-4 hours to get there. But so summers we spent in the forest and at my grandparents, because my grandparents, they had a sawmill. It was, if you'd see on TV, the little house on the prairie, where a little girl is running around there when they start, that was me. A very carefree, run around. We weren't allowed to go barefoot, but we had some shoes and ran in the meadow. That's how we grew up, with a carefree life, wonderful.
And did you experience any anti-Semitism during that time at all?
I was a child, I didn't, but later, but when I was about in 90, when we were in 90 up to, we had Marshal Pilsudski. He was the like he would say, president. No, the president was the prime minister of Poland. It was very good for Jewish people. But I was that time 3 and 5, I'm doing my math, was 8 years old when Moszczycki took over and Marshal Pilsudski died. Then it turned very, very bad for us Jewish people.
So
First of all,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
First of all, don't buy at the Jewish store. And they forbid kosher meat, mind you, we still had, they did, and we were afraid, honestly, as a child, before Pesach, we were afraid to go outside because they indoctrinated them that we killed Jesus, and they were taking blood, were killed that will be killing children or someone in order to get blood for matzah. So we were very afraid, and they threw stones after us. The only way they said, Żyd, Żyd, Żyd. Żyd is like a Jew in Polish and Ukrainian. So that, yes, we felt it very, very much. As a matter of fact, you could only go up to grade 7. There was no room for universities for the Jewish people in Poland. No, it was a very, very bad. And we were surrounded with the Ukrainians. The way our town was in the center, all the Jewish people lived in the center, and around us were the Ukrainians and the Polish people. And they call it the new city, Nowe Miasto. But in the city, we had quite a few Polish people, which were our neighbors. So with them, we lived in harmony, very much in harmony. But it turned out later, it was awful, you know.
So
That's all I can tell.
Okay, so let's talk about when things started to change, whether, you know, with the Russian occupation and then versus the German occupation.
During the German occupation?
Right. When did things first start to change in Koretz? Like when the ghetto was established, or you know, how did things change?
Oh, no. This was in up to 1939. In 13, and it changed after 35. In 1935, it changed when Pilsudski died, and they got a new prime minister.
Okay.
Or whatever, not the president, but they had a president. Rich Schmeichel was the president. So no, it changed in 1935 for the Jewish people. So when I was 8 years old, I felt that we were afraid to go outside. Before Pesach, before the Easter, 39, when the war started, we were taken over by the Russians. And it wasn't bad, you know. Well, when the war started in September 1st, well, it only lasted, a few weeks, and Poland was conquered, you know, by the Russians. But actually, it was a pact was made between the Russians and the Germans. So then when it changed because everything turned into Russian language. My school turned into a Russian school. And the Russian, when they came, wasn't so bad because they established a Jewish school, and they had a Ukrainian school, and the Polish turned to Ukrainian school, and a Jewish school, and a Russian. My mother come from Russia, so of course she took me out from the Jewish school. I should go to the Russians, so I went to the Russian school, and I spoke a perfect Russian at that time. You know, we grew up with languages. I grew up with 4 languages. But the Russian, we had a very normal life. We went to school. Of course, my grandparents died of heartbreak because they nationalized, because in the village where we went, they had a beautiful home and they had the fields and everything, and it was nationalized by the Russians. So they were heartbroken. But us kids, what did we know? We had very good by the Russian. I was a pioneer, you know, by the Russians when we came. And we learned that the only one that exists is Father Stalin. We were so indoctrinated, you know. And that's what was going up to 1940, 41, till June 22nd, when the war broke out. Yeah.
And then tell me how things changed during German occupation, how it presumably went to hell.
First of all, while we still had the Russians, you see, Poland was divided into the river book divides Poland, Eastern Poland, and Western, because the eastern part went to the Russia, and the western part went to Germany. And everybody was fighting because the Ukraine, where we were, was the breadbasket of Europe. Just like a fighting for oil, that's how we were fighting. As I see here on the map, you see, if you notice here the river Bug. Here, see, there's the river Bug. And that's Eastern Europe, which went to the Soviet Union. And this one went to Germany, this part.
Mhm.
So that's, and it was, we received Bеженцы, as we call them, which that's refugees. They never talked about, we didn't know what was going on the other side, on the German side. But some of them, they ran away. Which they ran away, they went over the Bug and they came into our part. So the Russian soldiers, because we were occupied by the Russians, so the Russian soldiers made sure that the people have, they're signed up to houses. We had no sugar or we had enough food, but not enough for extra. So they brought us food to feed the people. But then they stayed a day or two, and then they took them back to Russia to work in the mines on Donbass. Well, now when I think of it, it was more than right, They saved them. So thank God for the Russians that we've got the Sherita Pleta, which we call our Jewish people, that was left. It's because they didn't kill them. They had a hard life, but during the war, everybody has a hard life, which they brought them over the borders. Then, and that was up to June 41, 22nd. When the war broke out, the Russians came to us and said, they evacuated first their own people, and they came to us and said, come with us. So people packed up, and the Russians actually sent out first the kulaki. Kulaki, that was the rich people, sent them out in Siberia. You couldn't be rich. And the rest of us, that was before. The rest of us, they said, come with us. And they opened the borders because there still was a border. Many people did go. Us, my father, those days we had a horse and buggy. We sat on the horse and buggy and we were going, and we hit as far as Zhytomyr. And we came to that town, Zhytomyr, was the propaganda that in Russia, people are dying of hunger. My father remembers the Germans. I don't know Franz Joseph, from what I know, Franz Joseph was that time in Austria. Oh, it's right here in the map, yeah. You can see Zhytomyr in here. That's
Right here.
Yeah, that's Zhytomyr, yeah.
And here's
That's
correct.
Zhytomyr, and I'm from Kotz, yeah. So we went to Zhytomyr. And down there, when the propaganda went so bad, my father said, why would we the Germans they're all right. They won't do us no harm. Why would I go? The death of the sword, this I'll never forget. The death of the sword is easier. It's easier than the death of hunger. And we returned back. And we went back. By that time, not only the Germans were, our neighbors turned on us. It just was horrible. We came to hell. That's all. So that's what it was, and that's how it changed,
And then talk to me when you came back. I talk to me about Rosa, who lived in your community. What did you observe the Nazis do? What were some of the horrific things that you witnessed?
First of all, the Nazis established a Judenrat, that's a Jewish community council. And they established police, militia, they call them, the Ukrainian police and the Jewish police, which was with the Judenrat. And on every home had to be a Star of David, and every Jewish home. And everybody had to wear a armband with embroidered white and blue, a white armband with a blue embroidery of Star of David. Later, they changed it to a yellow patch. We had to change. But it's the neighbors who in the world knew that the Nazis, they didn't know. They're strangers. They don't know where a Jewish home was. So the neighbors sold us out. Although they were it's hard to explain what the neighbors did to us Jewish people. Later on, when they killed us, we were worth 2 kilos salt for a Jewish head when they brought in to kill. It's hard to comprehend and understand how neighbors can turn on you. You
So
know.
can you tell us the story about Yudgar Hermanus? What you observed?
About what? Sorry.
When you saw the Nazis come in and behind, what is it, behind the hospital? You saw them execute him?
When they came in, first of all, they did, as a matter of fact, I spoke with the son now in Israel because we have a Haskara with his grandson that happened. First of all, they gathered a few people. It was in Hebrew they say tohu, it was chaos. They gathered that town, all the people, and they told us to come by the hospital. And there was a grave was dug, a grave, and that's the name is Jimenez. And we call him Yutke because he was in the Piterne, because he did butter, I don't know, selling butter. We had extra names in our old town. So this Yutke Jimenez, they put him down there in the grave. What happened? The neighbor said that he stole burlap sacks, you know, because they found it in his house, which they put it there. He didn't know nothing about it. So I'll never forget, he stood in the grave and he was banging himself in his head. I didn't do nothing. I just didn't. I didn't. And they shot him there and he was killed. The next day we buried him in the Jewish cemetery. But it's still now, when I went after 60 years.
Are you watching it? Oh, it's interesting.
Yeah. After 60 years, they'll hear me. I went over there, 50 years. The ground down there where it was the grave, where they shot him, it's still soft behind the hospital. And as a matter of fact, his daughter just died. And I went, and his grandson, I spoke with him because we have Askara in Israel. No. Anyway, that's what I can tell you about. That's what it was. But they sure made sure that then they got into they killed behind our town quite a few people. But but before the Ukrainian holiday, Prochista, they decided that they have themselves a good time, the Ukrainians. And they gathered, they gathered some Jewish people, and I was walking with my father, and they grabbed him by his hand, a policeman, and he called him his name, Yoshko, you come, because my father's name is Yosef. He said, Yoshko, we come with me. So my father, those days, they grabbed us all to go to work. So we worked during the daytime, and then we came home. So he said, go and tell Mother, in the evening, I'll be home. He never came home, needless to say, he never. And we found their graves. We found the graves after 50 years. I went to the Ukraine. So then we found their graves. Look, life wasn't easy. There was hunger. We were hungry. And winter came. It was horrible. It was just horrible. We had to break furniture to heat the place. When they took us, we had to go. We had to work on the side, on the roads. And for all that, we got 100 grams of bread a day. We had to get up 3 o'clock in the morning to stay in the line for the bread. And how cruel they were.
Now talk to me about when the last time you saw, you just talked about the last time you saw your father. What about being separated from your mother?
This is Erev Shavuot, the eve of the Pentecostal days. Mother woke me up and she said there's so many people on the streets. So we went out. No sooner went out than somebody grabbed us, a policeman. And there were so many people on the streets. And we were going in line, and on each side of us was the police, the Ukrainian police, and the SS were going with rifles and gun beside us. And they marched us, and we were going down towards downtown, because we lived on the outskirts of town. And there was one lady, this I'll never forget, by Shuk. She went out of the line. So we went in the shutter right down there, and she was laying with the keys in her hand. Right there. That's the way the keys, I remember. I bet she figured out she'd go back home. We came downtown at Feldman's house on Monastirsky Street. There was so we had to take off the clothes, like the coats, and it was mountains of clothes in there, and dishes full of jewelry. So like my mother had to take off the ring and so on. And we stood, once we left all that, through the other door, we went outside and we were staying there. And as we were staying there, beside me was Rivka Smola. I mean, I come from a small town, everybody knew everyone. And we heard some shooting, we heard something. Wagons went by with people, with all the people on the wagons. And she said to me, you know, let's stay in front of our mothers. When they kill them, we won't see them. They'll kill us first. But they didn't kill us. They took us, they told us to go again. We went across on the market about two streets only over. And as we were staying down there, a German SS went, you point out with the fingers, and he pointed to me. How old are you? And I was going to say 14. My mother said she's 16 and pushed me. And just because I didn't want, he grabbed me by the hand. That was the last I saw my mother. That's it. And they took us to, it was Kleina's house. We sat in the yard. That day they took out 71, I think, people, because they needed some people for, for work, to clean the commandant's houses, to work on the road. So they saved some people. They didn't save. I mean, it was a job for them from 9 to 4. Was the killing, 9 to 4. Later found out. And we were sitting on the ground in the Kleina's. And then, but there was a story that's so vivid in my mind. We had in our town a girl named Rosa, and she was a little bit mentally. And she had a child, a 2-year-old child. And the Nazis came and says to her, Rosa danced. Rosa Heil Hitler, she puts out Heil Hitler. But in the meantime, they're playing with the child ball. one throws the child to another one. And she was jumping in the center, wanted to catch her child. And the Nazi took the child by one hand, smashed her against the fence, the child. You could see blood. I think it must be the brain salt. The head was all smashed. And we were all sitting, I don't know, sitting with, and just, speechless. Well, we couldn't speak, we didn't speak anyway, but, just numb. This is something, it's always in your mind, you can almost see it. And then, and it came 4 o'clock, we said, Schluss, go home. And tomorrow report to the Judenrat. And I went home. I didn't have a house. There's nothing in the house. I didn't have a home. I had no one. No one. In one day they took away, wiped out all my family. I was the only survivor. But then my brother survived too, because he worked. And that was only in one day.
And then when you went home, you thought that you can maybe go to your neighbor and get help,
When I
get some
came home,
food.
there was nothing in the house, not even much stick of furniture. They robbed everything. So I went over to my neighbor, Janitska. I was very good friends with her friend, Stasha. And she was like my second mother. So I went over to her and said, Fania Janitska, I've got no one, I've got a mother. I tried to hug her. So she says, get out of here, you dirty Jew. So I fell on the floor and so I forgot I hugged the leg. And I said, Fania Janitska, I don't have no one. I just don't have no one. So she said, get out of here, dirty Jew, and I count you is the war. We're suffering and I count you people. So I went home. That's home. I didn't have a home. I laid on the floor. There was nothing in there. But I was still a child. I had the youth. I fell asleep. Probably now I wouldn't. And then the next day we went to the Judenrat.
And explain to me what events led up to you being able to escape? How did you get out? How did you get to the forest? How did you survive the shootings?
The next day when they took us, we went to cover the graves. So where we covered, we did, I don't know how many days we went to cover the graves. I know on the third grade, the earth moved. And we came in, and then they put us in the ghetto right away. And the next day after the Pentecost days, it was still Shavuot. So, and there's so many people in one room, they signed up 2 or 3 streets and we were there. In the meantime, many people came in which were hiding because after 4 o'clock, there was no killing. So they did their job. So people were on the attics, in the basements where they're hiding. So we were very crowded. And that's the way we did. We suffered, There was a shortage of food. There was a shortage. They opened up the markets. We could go once or twice a week to the market, but there was no money that time. So you exchanged buttons, a coat, a sweater. You exchanged for food and so on. And that's. But between them was some good ones too that helped. I know Pasha helped me. She gave me a package. She gave me my sweater back. She went into the house. She said, everybody's robbing and taking things. I'll take 2 in case somebody will be left. So she gave me, I had a sweater, she gave me bread. So, there was some good one between them too. And anyway, and then it came at the Tabernacle Day, Sukkot. They had a mission, you see, by 42 should be Judenfrei, wherever, but in our areas. So we got, when it came out of Sukkot, there were rumors that they're going to get, the ghetto, and we're going to have the second, we call it Shchita or Aktia, the second mass killing. The rabbi came out and put the ghetto on fire. So it created a chaos. And he said, people, jump with me on Kiddush Hashem. He took a Sefer Torah to sacrifice ourselves with the Torah. I don't know. The ghetto was on fire, was documented. If he jumped in, nobody was know if he jumped in the fire or not. That I don't know. I know one thing. It was a case when I started to run. And I'm still running. I was running and running and running, and they were shooting after us. I don't know, the Germans or the Ukrainian police, they were shooting, they were shot. And when I came now, we have it's called the Zamek in Kovets. It's a cliff. How I got into that, jumped off the cliff, I don't know. I just can't, even now, I can't comprehend. I jumped down that cliff when I saw it. It was impossible to jump down, but I did, and I was running, and I kept running till I came into past the river, and I came into a cemetery, and I saw a grave, so I jumped into the grave. And I stayed over there. I didn't know what it was. I saw a hole. What did I know? I knew I had to run. And anyway, the next day I walked out and I started my journey. I started slowly. I was walking during the night. At daytime I was in hiding because don't forget where we are. It's a wheat country for rye and so on. So fields and fields. So you can, if you hear someone going, you go into the fields and nobody can see you at that time because it was the harvest time. So we still were thick with grain, and that's how I got into the forest, because being a child I knew where the forests are because we were in the forest. And I went into that direction, and that's how I got into the forest. Yeah. Fed myself on berries, there's lots of berries, and by night time slept in the barns, which they give food in the troughs for the pigs of the cows to bring in, So not for the cows, but for pigs in the troughs. So there was food. I wasn't hungry, That's how I got into the forest.
And how did you survive for 18 months in the forest? Who did you meet in the forest? Who helped you? What was it like?
Sometimes I wonder, did I go through that? So it's very hard to well, I went in. So it's a whole story, because it's not only that. I had dreams. My mother came to my dream and told me where to go. And if I'll tell you, you won't believe it, because it's very hard to believe that the dreams saved me.
Tell me that story. Tell me that dream that you had about your mother.
I dreamt when I was in the forest, I went to see a lady, Lunka, and she told me, you can't stay here, but down there in the forest is about 4 or 5 people. So she gave me some food, some bread to take with me, and I went into the forest. And that night I was dreaming that my mother came to me in my dream and told me, and told me that I should go over the sluice to Levache. What did I hear about the name Levache? And Kojarnik and Levache, the 2 places. over the Sluch, I knew, because I mean, we learned in school that was the river that never froze, you know. So